Hello and welcome to the Superior Comic Show, your weekly Irish podcast on all things pop culture. My name is Peter, I'm the host, and here on the Superior Comic Show, no, we are not going to move our seat up. On the show today, we have TikTok's absolute sensation, for any comic information you want. Many of you will know him as Moose, and I have to ask right away, first, welcome to the show, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Where'd the name come from?
The name is a play on my own last name, Mousseau. So I just figured, Moose_0. It's like, it has that kind of like online handle,
Yeah.
like way of going about it, and it's still, evocative of me. So that's why I went with it.
Oh, so not a huge Supernatural fan then.
Nah, sadly. I mean, I enjoy the show, but like it's I was delighted when when they started using that nickname for Sam. I was like, hey,
nice little connection.
Yeah.
So look, on TikTok, you've exploded. You're nearly 500,000 followers, and the likes and views on every video are just astronomical. I personally, when I first got on TikTok, I didn't think that possible for a pop culture comic based channel, but the likes of yourself, the Fixation, and I'll pronounce it wrong, and then there was Panda Red, who I had on a couple of weeks ago. It's just comic TikTok is booming.
Yeah, I'm in very good and rarefied company. And it was also like, honestly, it was also surprising to me too, because I was just like, oh wow, like people actually want to like hear me just prattle on about, the weirdly obscure comic book history, and like some characters you may not have heard of, or facts about characters you might not have had at the forefront, because you haven't devoted 20 plus years of your life to just poring over comics and hoarding that knowledge.
It's honestly, even myself, I'm here running a comic based podcast, but I've learned so much even from watching some of your videos. I've watched some and I've been like, did not know that. I need to do more research.
Well, that's like the whole thing that I do, and like my philosophy in doing these, comic book deep diving videos, is that I am of the mind that the best part of accumulating like comic trivia and like lore and things like that is getting to like share it with people in a way that's like, oh man, if you like this character, you got to check out this other character. They're crazy. They have this wild background. It's like stuff that like it's been it's twice removed retcon, but like man, was it wild.
Yeah, it's like comics history is so vast, and for every version of a character, you don't know a separate version of them. Like, I've done a whole video on different versions of Scarlet Witch, and some I hadn't a clue about. The one I grew up on was Ultimate Scarlet Witch and all that controversy. Because I started Ultimate Comics.
Oh, Ultimate Comics. They sure were a thing.
Only good to come out of Ultimate Comics was Spiderman.
I think that's like it's really interesting. It's a thing where like their heart was in the right place of wanting to give like ease of access to newer readers that didn't want to dive into characters with a 60 plus year background, and because that can be intimidating. Like, that's a good thing. And then it's like, here's some of the choices we've made with the characters, specifically like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. And it's like, oh no, not like that. It's like, yeah, like I'm fine with having a teenage, high schooler Peter Parker again, but maybe we don't need the like incestuous Maximoff twin thing happening.
Yeah, there's been a few times in Marvel history where they've gone to incestuous relationships. Old Man Logan had that storyline.
Yeah, that was with the Hulk ring. Yeah. Ugh.
And look, I'm sure it's great talking. I love talking to people like yourself who have gotten on the show from reaching out, because in Ireland the comic book industry is still growing, but it's not as big. So it's very rare to find more than one person in a friend group who is interested in more than just the movies.
Yeah. I'm always happy to talk comics and talk comic shop.
She said you've been collecting comics for 20 plus years. What got you into comics?
Um, it's it's hard because I know the first comics. I have vivid memories of the first comics that I bought. Um, and I don't know exactly what like, the impetus was outside of like maybe it was just really enjoying like the animated series of the 90s of like Spider-Man and X-Men and Justice League and like seeing like Batman and like being like, oh cool, like there's like comics I can read about that. But like the thing that I like the distinctly remember is when I was like 10, maybe 11. Uh and I had come into a sum of money, which was probably $40 or $50, which was the most money I'd ever had at that point. Um, and so, like any responsible 10 or 11-year-old, I immediately blew it all on comics. Um, and I went to this great shop, which is changed locations, but is still open in my hometown. Um, and I was like, okay, like there's all like the new comics up on the walls, and like I haven't read anything currently, so I don't know how to jump in. And I was like, oh, then they have trade paperbacks, which are easier to like read, but I can only maybe get like 2 or 3 of them before I'm completely out of money. Um, and so then I was like, saw like the back issues, and they have these like boxes of comics. There's like, yeah, a buck each. I was like, that's most bang for my buck. That's what I can get. So I just went and got like 30 or 40 random back issues of characters that I enjoyed in the middle of story arcs that were so wild to me. That the two that stand out, I'm trying to remember exactly. I know I got a Spawn comic because I was a 10-year-old boy, and I think as deep as it can get, Spawn is very much a character for 10-year-old boys. Just brooding and muscly and guns and like punching people. It's like, yeah. Um, but the one that stands out was I had gotten an issue of Spider-Man, and it was in the middle of this event uh, that was essentially like I think it's the Identity Crisis arc. If you're familiar with it,
Yeah.
yeah. So I just picked up. It was like I think it was the one with him as the Hornet on the cover. Um, and I remember just like reading it and being like, wait, so now Jameson wants to kill Spider-Man, and Spider-Man has to have like 5 different identities to fight crime. It's like, what is happening? I just remember being like so like lost, but in a really good, fun way, where it's just like is this what comics is? Is this it's just like this like every issue of comics is just this crazy like what is gonna happen next? And I think that was what really hooked me on honestly was just this what is arguably one of the like oddest and definitely not one of the best Spider-Man arcs, but definitely just in sheer insanity. I think that was the thing that really kind of brought me into comics.
It's crazy. Like Spider-Man was, I'm sure my listeners are sick of hearing this, but two things you said so far in the show. I got into comics for the first time through, like yourself, the animated series. But I was 6 years old and year 2000, my grandmother got me the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man. And so I kicked off with Ultimate Spider-Man. And I think that's why in debates I wholeheartedly defend Tom Holland's Spider-Man because he, to me, is Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's and like the thing was like too like Ultimate Spider-Man is a really solid run, and especially in terms of like updating the character without making him seem like too like, hey, hello, how do you do, fellow kids? It read young as well, which helped. Yeah, no, I loved the run of Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah, I think, like we said, it was the kind of one shining light that came out of the Ultimates run was him, and then obviously
Hmm.
the introduction of Miles Morales,
Yeah.
which I, not to brag, I still have the first appearance
I
comics.
think I think I have that too. I remember that was like another comic that is like seared into my brain of buying. I remember like because it was when I'd gone away for a little while from Marvel Comics. I think I was like deep into like IDW, Image, like Boom, like the like other not the non big two. Like I wanted to see like what else was in there, like the indie comic world. And I remember hearing like, hey, they're killing off Spider-Man. They're gonna bring in a new Spider-Man. It's like, oh, okay, I better jump in. So like I remember picking up that like Death of Spider-Man, like that ultimate like and like kind of like transition into like introductory issue of Miles Morales. I remember seeing him fighting like the kangaroo and like having that like people make comments about how it is so poor taste of him fighting crime in a cheap Spider-Man costume because he had just died. I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah, it was. It was, and honestly, I think it was good storytelling. And as much as it broke my heart, being so young of Peter Parker dying, it was to me. I was reading this, going, "Holy crap! This publisher Marvel has balls to kill
Yeah,
off
well,
Peter Parker."
it's also like it was an earned death.
Yeah,
It wasn't like we'd been with Peter for maybe a year, maybe like 12 issues, and now we're killing him off. It's like no, we were with him for like over a decade, and for them to like kill off what was arguably the flagship character of the Ultimate Comics line in lieu of this new to kind of discuss like legacy and like a new Spider-Man and like everything is like was he's like yeah like ballsy on Marvel's part to like be willing to change. And I know that I'm sure a large part of that was because it was in the Ultimate Universe, but I think also that had to have been around the time that they were already planning on like okay we're gonna end the Ultimate Universe and
yeah.
kind of bring over what few characters were really working into the main universe.
And that I love that as well. That big event, that the mixing of the worlds was just incredible. And
Mm-hmm.
as someone that was, this was still my first run in comics, it was mind blowing. And that was how I got into other characters, was events like this where other characters are popping up in the book I'm reading. I'm like, oh, he's interesting. I'm gonna go read one of his books.
Yeah, it's always cool. Like that is the thing. Like I know that, and like I know myself included, have kind of given a lot of flack towards like the need of like a yearly event in comics that just like every okay, it's been a year, we have to have an event. But the things that I have liked about them is the fact that they do give an opportunity that if you're unless you're a madman and you are literally reading like every book that comes out, like who has the time or money? Um, but like unless you like, it gives you a chance to see characters that you don't typically read and go like, oh, I really like how that character was like acted in this event. Like I should go check out their series, like
Yeah.
either leading up to it or like after this event to see like what's going on. Um, and I think I also really like is that even the like series that maybe didn't quite stick the landing. Maybe some of the ones that maybe weren't as fully fleshed out as they wanted it to be. A thing that I really like and appreciate about both Marvel and DC in regards to their advances, they've done a really good job of building, of using kind of like taking the things that were working about those events and building on them to make new stories and actually new like compelling things out of them. It's like it's definitely occasionally been like a lemonade from lemons situation,
Yeah.
but it has led to some really interesting character moments as well. Like one of my favorite Marvel comic character is Hawkeye, as I'm very vocal about. Um, and like I think like many people didn't really enjoy Civil War 2. I don't think it was a good idea in concept, but in execution, it really messed with a lot of characters in not great ways. But one of the ways I did actually like it was what it did with Hawkeye's character of really kind of not only putting him to the forefront with like having to kill Bruce Banner before he could turn into the Hulk, and like the guilt that came with that, and then the guilt that came with not having the Hulk around, so that's probably led to the rise of Hydra Cap and like trying to help the and like this it really kind of built in on this this kind of was like martyr complex that Clint Barton has had in comics for like the last decade, which is something I kind of enjoy about the character of this guy who yeah, he doesn't have powers, he doesn't have armor. He's just going out there because he feels responsible for a lot of the things that are happening around him. And if any of his fellow Avengers do something wrong, he feels responsibility to try to set it right for the people on the ground. And
I'll
that's
be
what I
honest,
like
like
about that.
I will openly admit, I'll always do Hawkeye for me. didn't like him at first, and I'll be honest, it was recently when I done a watch through of the MCU in chronological order because it was COVID lockdown and I had nothing better to do.
Right.
Yeah, I gained a whole new appreciation for him, and it was the same with Cap. I was not a huge fan of Cap all the way through until I rewatched, and I was like, I kind of hate to admit this, but I was wrong.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and like that, like for the movies too. Like it's been interesting of like seeing them like kind of building off of stuff as the years have gone on, and it's the same for me. Like it took me. I mean, a lot of people. I don't think I'm alone in this thought, but like I really didn't care much about Thor until Ragnarok because it it kind of felt like they didn't know what to do with him. Like they knew he was a big, strong dude with a hammer who could summon lightning, and like that's kind of it. It's like you have his origin movie where he shows up on Earth, and we kind of play with that fish out of water bit, and then the Dark World happened, um, and it just kind of was and like has been a good thing to pull from, but it just kind of is a very middle movie of a trilogy. And then like Ragnarok happened, and it was just like, oh, there's a character here, and he actually has a personality, and it's like we're getting to see stuff, and we can build on this like through then Infinity War and Endgame of getting to see this arc happen of somebody having to deal with like what does worthiness mean and like self-worth. And it's like it becomes a very interesting character study, but it's one that like doesn't you don't really know what to do with. And like that's my defense of Hawkeye. A little bit more in the comics than the MCU. I'm really excited about the upcoming Disney Plus series. I think that's going to I'm hoping a load of good for everyone to kind of like key back in on Hawkeye as a character of like, no, he's worthy. He's worthwhile. You should check him out.
Yeah, you like, and I was one, and so I can't even say some people. I was one that for years was just like he's just the Legolas of the MCU. He's like that's it. And but when you actually look more into him, I think it was when I had a kid that I kind of responded more to him because it's kind of like, okay, he has a family at home and he's out here doing this. Like holy shit! And then
Right.
I seen him as Ronan then in Endgame. I got chills. I was like, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
badass.
it's like this is a man who has like lost everything and is again like kind of like I was talking about with like how he is in the comics of like taking that responsibility on of like going out and trying to do something to salvage what is left of the world.
And is now I see a lot of people, and I see them in comment sections. I see them on YouTube. I see them on Twitter, constantly comparing the MCU to the comic books, which, in my opinion, you can't really do because, like,
Yeah,
you can't take a comic run and put it on screen. It will be hours and hours and hours long, and you just it's very very expensive.
yeah, it takes a lot, and that is also like it's the problem too of like it's kind of like what story do you tell? Because when you have these characters who are been around for almost 100 years, some of them, it's like okay, so we're gonna take roughly a 2.5-ish hour movie, and we have that much time to tell a part of one story about this one character, and what do we do about that? And so like that's why I feel like the MCU has been really smart about how it's chosen to like pull elements from like notable runs while maintaining the integrity of the overarching story that they are telling.
Yeah, I think I've seen a comment that I completely agreed with. Someone said, if I wanted to see panel for panel Civil War on the screen, I would just project a PDF of Civil War comic.
Yeah, like it's and yeah, that's a point that I kind of stick to is that I don't it's the point of an adaptation of any adaptation, whether it's a comic book movie or an adaptation of a book or like a like play or something like anything, is that you need it needs to adapt into whatever media form it is becoming. You can't like I said, you can't have a panel for panel, shot for shot thing of a comic of a movie, because yeah, it'll be like 5 hours long, and B, it's two different mediums that are like borrowing from one to try to like make it into the other.
Yeah, and like I think that makes the movies better. Like I think for us as comic readers, like I was watching Civil War and going into Civil War, in my head I was like, at the end, at the very very end of this, I'm waiting for a post credit scene where Cap gets shot,
Right.
and it didn't happen, and I was caught by surprise. I'm like, okay, I like this. This is a media that I'm really interested in, put on the big screen, but it's surprising me. It's keeping me on my toes. It's not predictable.
That's yeah, and that's like what I've enjoyed. It's also why like I'm currently enjoying Falcon and Winter Soldier, because it's a thing where inherently is not necessarily based off of any one run, but it is incorporating so many facets of like these Cap and Cap adjacent characters kind of coming together to like talk about like what legacy means, and like how in some instances if you do not embrace a legacy that you're given, it will be taken away from you by like others. And like I'm interested. Like, I love Zemo has been actually one of my favorite MCU villains. Um, the smug point I like to make to people is that uh, I would argue that like until Killmonger, Zemo at least was the first MCU villain to win.
Yeah,
Um, like he got exactly what he wanted and managed to more or less get away with it. Um, and it's why like I'm like really interested to watch him in the show, because it's like it's very evident that he has his own agenda, but I have no idea exactly what the end game of that agenda is going to be. I just know it's like it's going to be bad for almost everyone, but it's like watching him get there is really interesting.
yeah. I was literally saying that to my partner there, watching Falcon the Winter Soldier yesterday. I was saying Zemo is, in my opinion, the best MCU villain. One, because just like Killmonger, you can actually agree with some of the points he's making. Like I feel bad for him sometimes. He lost his
Yeah,
whole family. And two, he beat the Avengers and broke them up without throwing a single punch.
yeah. He was just able to just kind of pull at the strings and like
Yeah,
be like, hey, like, isn't it kind of messed up that you guys are saying that you're on the same team, and with despite the fact that this guy killed your parents, and he knew about it and didn't say anything, and like just really just play them against each other of just playing politics. And like, yeah, watching Zemo through Civil War, of him just kind of working his way, even until like the fact that he's not even really like in he's not in a fight in the entire movie, and he's not really the prime focus of it until like the last 20 minutes of it. It's really impressive of a puppet master kind of villain to be able to just leave everything, let them fight it out amongst themselves, and let them sow their own discord while he sets off to just get the justice that he wants.
yeah. And I think with his arc as well in Civil War, other than in Iron Man 3, it's one of the first times we see the repercussions of what the Avengers are doing. It's not just,
Mm-hmm.
we'll send the cleanup crew and it'll be all good. And then Homecoming done the same thing then when they brought Vulture into it. We're finally seeing the
Yeah,
repercussions.
it's
And
it's really, yeah, that's really interesting. I'm enjoying this new phase of villain, of being villains that are the after effect, the effect of stuff that was either the direct action of these heroes, or like in the event of like Killmonger, a generational thing of a sins of the father kind of thing of,
yeah,
because T'Chaka sent him away, that's what he became. And it was like if he had actually kept him closer, that if he hadn't killed him, there would be no Killmonger.
yeah. It is, and we're seeing it now. Even the repercussions are still going in Falcon and the Winter Soldier with Sharon.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the way they're telling the story now. There are so many people, and there's a lot of these. You have the fanboys who are either Marvel or DC, and then you have the dog. You have the fanboys then who are saying Marvel heroes just destroy cities and nothing gets done. And now we're seeing that Marvel do have a plan here. There is repercussions that they're paying for.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's like, and that's like the other thing too, is like going back to like the thing that I like about like the aftermath of these like the comic events, is watching what happens. I'm always I think 9 times out of 10 of the last handful of events of both Marvel and DC, I've always been way more interested in what happens in the direct aftermath of the event, how they pick up the pieces, that what the new status quo is that everyone's having to deal with, usually more so than the event itself. And that's like what I'm really interested about this, is that like this whole like kind of walking into this new phase of Marvel is all just direct fallout of Endgame, of the blip, of the actions that both those who were gone are now having to like play catch up on, those who were there, what they did in order to get by are having to do. And it's like, it's really interesting. And like, I've seen a lot of people complaining that Falcon Winter Soldier is like moving slowly. The pacing is like very even and like cautious, more than like WandaVision was, which is just like a mile a minute, like what is going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, but like this is like it's a different story. It's like the story that it is setting it up is looking at, you know, WandaVision was specifically about the mental fallout of Wanda Maximoff and the loss of Vision and kind of the world that she has to now live in. And like this is a similar but different story of what everyone else had to do, and like the like differentiates between the people who got dusted and the people who didn't, and those who were now left behind after Endgame to try and figure out who they want to be and what kind of hero they can be for the world, and whether they need or want to even be, you know, a legacy hero or to be their own person. And like that's, I'm really like this. I like people like kind of, you know, talked about how like WandaVision got really into the like the stages of grief and really kind of like did a good job of showing like people working through that. And I think this is really doing a good job of that question of legacy, of you know, of everything like I said about like, you know, about the PTSD and you know, veterans rights and racism in America, and like all the like class disparities and like things like that, like everything that like everything else that is like not inherently like superhero-y, but is like geopolitical in a world where half the population disappears in an instant and then 5 years later comes back. It's like, what do you know, who do you prioritize when they come back? Do you focus on the people who are now back? Do you focus on the people that you had? Like,
It's
it's
kind of
interesting.
yeah, it's kind of shows it's a lot of it going on, and you see a lot, I think, as well in everyday life when it comes to asylum seekers and refugees. There's people on the
Mm-hmm.
either side of the fence. Some are like, we should look after them, while others are like, we should look after our own first.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think on screen now we're seeing that kind of battle there of, do we look after our own who've been here for 5 years, or these people who are just back? And as
Mm-hmm.
well with the PTSD and everything, and there's the tales of imposter syndrome that Sam could be feeling, which is
Mm-hmm.
huge. And even Bucky now getting into his, my heart broke when he looked at Sam and said, if he was wrong about you, then he was wrong about me.
Like honest, like in the middle of this otherwise very lighthearted and like fun bantery like scene, yeah, just that out of nowhere, just a gut punch of Bucky's line of that just yeah, ruined me. And like that's the thing that I've also really, the thing that I think is making Falcon and Winter Soldier work is because the chemistry between Sebastian Stan and Anthony Mackie is great, and the way that the banter is being written is to me interesting, because to me it feels different than a lot of the banter that we've seen in other movies, other series, because these are not like two people being like, "Oh, isn't this a crazy situation? We're fighting an alien. Can you believe this?" Like, to try to like, you know, rationalize this, I'm going to make a reference here. It's very much the feeling of two people who need to have a hard conversation, who don't want to, and so they're joking about it instead of talking about it. And like it's all because it always has that like, there's a bit of like a falling off. There's no like set up punchline. It's more like we're gonna say this, we're gonna quip, but we don't want to say what we need or want to say.
Yeah, it's a classic kind of, like, I love seeing it as someone who's been through the whole therapy route before. It is a classic of what people do when they're in that situation, is you will beat around the bush as much as possible. You'll drop the odd hint or dig or joke about what's really bothering you before eventually they're gonna have to have that chat.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm for one looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
But I do need to ask you one more thing. I have a feeling Feige has this phase planned. He has a plan now. I'm sure he has the next
Oh
three,
yeah.
4 phases planned now. Would you have any idea or any clue, or do you have any opinion on who you think the big bad for this whole phase is going to be?
I mean, it's hard because I don't inherently know if they're going to necessarily do kind of like the Thanos thing where there's this kind of creeping evil coming in that we get to see flashes of and glimpses of until they show up, because they've done that before. They don't need to do it again. Um, and it's interesting. It's interesting looking at the villains that we know are going to be showing up. That we know that like Nightmare is the big villain of Multiverse of Madness. That we know that I think arguably more in terms of sheer potentiality, Kang the Conqueror and Ant-Man and the Wasp 2, I think I would love to see, because again we've already kind of set up, but with the end of Endgame, and I mean really honestly, the middle of Endgame too. Endgame setting up kind of the messing with the time stream aspect, and then we know that Loki is going to bring in the Time Variance Authority because of his transgressions against it, and knowing that also they're a big enemy of Kang, and like I think that we're very clearly kind of building into the broader Marvel universe in terms of the multiverse and in terms of the time stream of the past and the future and the alternate timelines. And I honestly kind of think it could be Kang, just simply because I think he would have like the sort of like the supplies, like he would have the things to pull from. Surely you could just introduce the Council of Kangs and just be like, yeah, we have this every timeline on lock, and we can basically manipulate this the way we want to. It's interesting. Like again, all I have been crying for years has been, I just really want a good on-screen like movie version of Doom.
Yes.
Uh, and like I think Doctor Doom would be an incredible villain to have on as a like phase wide big bad. I think would be interesting. Um, I know that I know it's not going to come anytime soon, because I know that they're wanting to introduce the Fantastic Four and X-Men, the two arguably two of the biggest Marvel properties that would also have one of the hardest times kind of lining up with the current
Yeah.
MCU, with them not having been there and having to address that of, well, we don't do we full on origin them? Do we say, oh, they've been somewhere else? Like how, like I am very interested, and I do not envy at all the, I'm sure, like round the clock writers room they have going on to try and figure out the best way to introduce the X-Men into the MCU. Um, and like it's also why, like, as much fun as I was having with the speculating of like, oh, this could be how they introduce it with WandaVision. Uh, I very much am like, when take your time. I don't want it rushed. I'd rather have it done right than done quick. And it's also like very clearly they have a lot of stuff that they're setting up. I think one that I think is getting overlooked a lot, if for no other reason than because there hasn't even been a trailer released for it, is the Eternals that's coming out, that we still have coming out this year, and that also is, I think, could play into, again. I think we're looking broader within this upcoming phase of the MCU. Of I think time is very clearly playing a lot of things within time and space, and I think my bet would be on Kang the Conqueror as
Yeah.
the big one for at least the next phase. I can't say if inherently, like, maybe not immediately as like big a threat as Thanos, but like still potentially a huge threat because of the fact that he can just go back in time and make you not exist if he really wanted to. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Like, I'm interested in seeing. I'm just happy that once again we're in a year where we get 4 Marvel movies coming out in 1 year. Like, man, it's going to be in 4 very different Marvel movies. And like, yeah, like I'm excited. I'm still excited about Black Widow. I'm excited to see Taskmaster and everything like into the MCU. I'm excited to see that. Like I said, I'm real interested in the Eternals. I've been reading the new run of the Eternals that Marvel has out by Kieran Gillen, and it's really good, and it has me like hyped up of like, oh, I hope the characters in the movie are as good as the characters in this comic are, because I'm very much enjoying them. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think Kang is going to be the big one for now, anyway, for the time being. In terms of bringing the X-Men and Fantastic Four in, I agree. I do not envy that writers' room, but I think Feige and some other writers are having fun with it, because I think they're going to continue to give us fake out after fake out just to keep the chat boards going. And just honestly, I can see Kevin Feige reading these message boards, seeing the whole mutant theories and the Mephisto theories, and laughing his ass off.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it's stuff that they're like, I like we like we are not going in that direction at all, but it's really interesting to watch how people are going.
Yeah.
But yeah, like it's been interesting to me that how like they have been teasing a lot of stuff related to the X-Men. Like again, like with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, with like a lot of things of like, oh, a potential like the Norm Mutants, the House of M stuff out of like WandaVision. And then like in Falcon and Winter Soldier with them introducing Madripoor, which is like, you know, plays into like numerous X-Men stories. That it's like it'll be interesting to kind of see if now I'm just like, I'm not looking at like, oh, how could this bring into the X-Men, but I am looking for like, what's the next reference? What's the reference going to be in Loki for the X-Men? What's it going to be in Hawkeye? Like it's like, oh, I can't wait to see like how they're gonna like kind of like slowly like build this house, and like you don't realize what it is until like the door has been installed. They're like, oh, it's a house, and it's like it's gonna be really fascinating to see.
See, the funny thing is as well, people will pick up, I think, references that aren't even there. Like you see in Hawkeye, they go to a zoo and there's a Wolverine exhibit, and someone's gonna post up on TikTok, Wolverine confirmed.
Yeah, there he is.
It's crazy. And like with all these theories, I honestly, the first place I go after an episode of each show is to your TikTok, just to see the video you've put out and what you've had to say about it.
Yeah, thank you.
How like, do you schedule your TikToks, or is it just kind of when the inspiration hits?
Yeah, it's sort of like a little column A, little column B. There, I have like a running list of for like character videos that I have like saved in my drafts of just like people like asking like requests. Either like I pull from the request, I pull from just like, oh, I really want to talk about this character. And then for stuff like the like recap and theory videos, I tend to record those like right after I finished watching an episode, so that it's still like fresh in my mind. And I can like more easily like directly reference things.
I'm very impressed with your just comfort in front of the camera. Like I've seen on my TikTok, I've tried doing a few things. I've tried doing explanations. I've tried doing little skits, just to, but I can't. I'm always about 40 as thrown in between every sentence, and your videos are just crisp and clean right through. Is like, does practice go into that, or is it just natural?
Oh no, it's a lot of practice. It's a lot of getting, again, like having to get over watching myself on camera, and then just kind of like figuring out the rhythm of the flow of like the video, like of like knowing where to like leave air where I can edit it, and like kind of like otherwise like kind of like knowing like about like trying to like guess like how much can I say that I'm gonna set, you know, the timer for like 7 seconds. What can I fit into that? Usually it's a lot of trial and error of, I know like I kind of break down to be like, these are the things I'm going to talk about in this video, and then like I whittle down based on how it kind of breaks down like from piece to piece of like the time. So like if I want to say a lot on the thing and I only have 7 seconds, I'll constantly just be like re-recording that bit until I can get what I get the version of what I want to convey in that amount of time.
Look, that is the baby's home from hospital now, so I wasn't going to keep you too long. Anyway, I got so much information. It was incredible having you on. I know you're only home from
Yeah,
work.
thanks for talking to me.
Everyone, make sure to follow him on TikTok. Get him to that 1,000,000 and get
Please
that
do.
blue tick mark. Listen, Moose, thanks very much for coming on. And I will definitely be watching you and that majestic mustache every time after a show.
Thank you very much. I look forward to
Thanks
seeing
very
you.
much. You too.